I have a thought about that. I've been in America for 50 years, and I've been only 3 times back home. And the last one was 2003. For me, the relations between our history and today is nostalgia, missing homeland that I cannot go.
I'd say it's very similar for me. I've left Istanbul in 1979 and went back in 83 and haven't been back. And to me, the call of the places where my family and my ancestors grew and lived is very, very strong. But there is this still a big gap, if you will, between where I am and where that place is, and that's a constant tug with a lot of barriers.
And for me, it means once upon a time we shared same land, and we have similar cultures, but then it's gone, and we are talking about something else, and it's not very easy to talk about for many Turks. I was born in a very old neighborhood in Antep, and it used to be an Armenian neighborhood. So when I was a very small child, even 4 and 5 years old, I was listening about Armenians, because all the houses were Armenian houses. So we were talking about some group and Armenians, but there were no Armenians around. So it was my first contact with this Armenian-Turkish relations. I remember one page in my history book. There was this famous ship with which Atatürk went to Samsun. On that page, it's in front of my my eyes now. There was a paragraph depicting Greeks, and I was so afraid of Greeks that I told myself that, oh God, please don't put any Greek across my road ever in my life. So they're so that creatures, and even in my dreams, the Greeks are so bad people. I was afraid of Greeks. That the thing is similar for Armenians. All you know about our education system, we're imposed some thoughts, and later in university times, I was come across with different groups, different ethnic groups, and at the end I was married an Armenian.
So you already experimented the Turkish-Armenian relationships,
Yeah.
beginning with your marriage.
Yeah.
Good luck.
I'd say for me it's been a process. Growing up, my grandparents were active as survivors of the genocide to give their families' story. So it was always part of my family to hear their journey, whether through Deir Zor or through Syria into Lebanon. And so this idea of this human rights atrocities perpetrated on us as a people was very much something I in my family. And so I grew up to be involved in genocide commemorations, marches and so forth, with the knowledge that the genocide was perpetrated by a different government, not Turkey's current government. And then came the realization that the current government has a policy of denial. And so although not murdering Armenians by not acknowledging it, by not giving us justice through by starting with acknowledging the acts of the previous government, there was this continuation of genocide.
My personal awakening came very, very late, actually. My late 20s, maybe early 30s, when I came to the United States. The reality about Armenians, Armenian genocide and everything. I grew up in Zonguldak, a coastal town in Karadeniz region, and obviously I had no contact whatsoever with any Armenians. But when I went to Istanbul to go to middle school, there was a kid named Eddie. Apparently he was an Armenian, I didn't know. And in our class we had Jews. There were more Jews actually than Armenians. And I remember the very first thing I remember, which I still remember today very vividly, that some of my friends making a comment about Eddie, comparing him to my Jewish friends, Lori and Rosette, saying that Lori and Rosette are fine, they are Jews, but Eddie is an Armenian. So my Turkish friends were saying this. I didn't make any sense of the depth of this, the terribleness of this, until I came to the United States, finally getting to know a couple of Armenians, hearing about different aspects of Armenian issue and Armenian genocide and whatnot.
Growing up in Turkey as an Armenian, the relationship between Armenians and Turks, to me, had all the power on the Turkish side. As an Armenian in Istanbul, I had nothing. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't, debate, question, etc. I just was yes, and I knew what I knew, which wasn't really a lot because my grandparents didn't really talk much about it other than some terrible thing happened. When I left Turkey and when I came here and found myself in a different environment and honestly started learning more of the history that I didn't know, and I wasn't also in an environment where I was pressured not to talk about it, I saw the power start to shift in that relationship. So I could have a conversation, a more honest conversation with a Turkish friend here than I could in Istanbul, in Turkey.
So, having grown up in a small village in Anatolia, you don't grow up with biases. But then again, when I came to Istanbul, I was educated in a Turkish school for 2 years, and I got kicked out of there because the other kids, again, I'm talking when I'm 11, 12 years old, I want to play with my friends, and then they used to call me Gavur, where you're not going to come into our game. And then one of them punched me, I punched him back, and then we ended up at the principal's room, and the principal started to slap me instead of slapping both of us. Remember now, I'm only 12 years old, and I don't have the comprehension of the brain to analyze the situation like an adult, say he's my teacher or principal. I took that to the heart, and then I yelled, I swore at the principal, of course, and they kicked me out of the school. Ever since then, I said, as soon as I get a chance, I'm going to leave this country. I'm 12 years old.
What happened to these people was a question. Sometimes come to our minds, and sometimes we talk about it. And our grandmother, my grandfather, actually he was a warrior during the independence war of Antep, so he knows the issue very well, and they didn't talk much about it. They just said they've gone. Later, during school years, of course, we are told about all minorities, Armenians, Greeks, and it was not very positive.
We cannot change the past. We have no time machine to change the past. But we should remember it, feel bad about it, learn a lesson, and not repeat it again. So I've been here 45 years, but my kids might be different, but I still cannot get rid of my culture that I was born in. I like çiğ köfte, I like the Turkish jokes. What do you want me to do about it? So If there's some higher powers, they brought me to this world in an Anatolian village. It's not my fault. I'm not going to deny my Turkish ancestry, origin, cultural origin, I mean. So, with all respect to Armenians that are too keen, one-sided, biased history of theirs, I disagree with them.
History teaches us most of the things that's going to happen, unfortunately. It repeats itself. Our history in Turkish history has been every 10, 15, 20 years a hardship on the minorities. During World War I, the Ottoman Empire got into war. This is a state that's spending money for weapons, and their budget grew. Their income grew. How that can happen during a war? From the Armenians, from the Greeks. Massacre them. Take every gold, coin, whatever they had, and kill them. No witness. This happened to my own family. We are ignoring history. That is our blind spot.
Are you advocating that it can happen in the future?
Yes, it's happening right now. Not in Turkey, somewhere else. Always just look around. We Armenians, we live with fear. We grew up with fear. Why do you think our grandparents didn't talk about it? Mm-hmm. Shush, shush, they can hear you. They can kill you. That's how we grew up. My father didn't tell me what happened. He was talking with my uncle. I was playing marbles on the living room on the carpet. I could hear what they were saying. Then I did read about it. But we are missing the big picture. We're not looking at history. And you're talking about starting from the bottom? Yes, the bottom is history. You go to school, if you don't read the right thing, you think you know everything. You don't. I think we have to educate ourselves, our children, and the generations to come. But you cannot deal with a country like Turkey where they have all that prejudice because they're brought up like this. They're reading this book.
I understand. You're pointing out the wrong, but the question remains, is still on the table. Who's going to change it for the future?
It's said that we cannot cultivate our minds beyond our prejudice. It's all in our hands. It depends how we educate ourselves. I wrote this in case anybody wants to see it later. The Turkish history book and what it says about what Armenians were, what traders they were. And this is taught today in school.
We also know about land in Aintab and Kayseri. It was never somewhere that I wanted to go, but there's talk about repatriation, about taking back lands, and that was not something in my family or in my heart that I wanted. But recently, several weeks ago there was a presentation about a trip of Armenians that had gone back to Kharpet, and the message was, we have to go back so that Armenians aren't these mythical, unknown, they once lived here and didn't go back. It shows that we do care about our homes in Turkey, about our identity in Anatolia, of that blood, of being Armenian, but also means living in Turkey and being part of Turkey. And so this is new for me. I'm trying to work on, but my obligation to witness, to say I am Armenian, and it matters that I'm from Aintab. It matters that I'm from Kayseri. It matters that is where I'm from.
I say the only formula for the 100-year-old problem is very simple. Bury your dangerous weapons. That means pre-accusations, prejudgments, assumptions. For a little while, forget your religions, nationalities, race, and ethnic backgrounds. Forget your your and their histories, forget all the world parliaments and governments. Put them aside. Simply go, really go to each other's countries, homes, shops, mosques, churches, etc. Sit down and talk. Just talk, like the two lost children of the same mother, Anatolia. Don't hold back. No hold back. Talk, but also listen about anything and everything with open hearts. Talk about your common food, your music, your traditions, memories, stories. Talk about yourself, your family, your children, your parents, your great-grandparents, and all else. See, my friend, how fast you will come to a just resolution once and for all. Is called dialogue. In memory of my friend Kaan Ağartan.
A couple of years ago, I organized a panel about, it was the 100th anniversary commemoration of the Armenian Genocide in Framingham, and there were more than 100 people attended to that panel. I first had so many Armenians together and had a chance to interact with them, but what I was puzzled with, and maybe we can discuss this together too, that the Armenians that wanted to ask questions to the panelists that we had were all so much into the Turkish politics. They knew everything about the Turkish government, what they were trying to do, and I was so puzzled. A little disappointed too, that so many people on the Armenian side, if I may, were so much into the political aspect of this or the state aspect of it, and they were not necessarily thinking about, I was thinking back then, how to establish this human relationship and how to deepen those human relationships in order to get over the feeling that my earlier middle school friends had in their hearts. I was more interested in the second aspect than the first one, but I was hearing all these political comments coming to the panelists and to the panel in general and trying to change the politics in Turkey from outside. And I was, to be honest, a little disappointed at that time.
I honestly find that very normal. Maybe Kaan was surprised because he doesn't know the diaspora Armenians as well as I do. But that is very normal. They're yearning. They still think that they have some sort of a relationship, touch with that ancestral land, even though it's in their thoughts. They're not physically in touch there, but they're yearning.
So they think maybe the Turkish government is their government too, and they want to change the government.
I wish they did that.
Yeah.
Then a few million diaspora would support the democratic forces in Turkey. If I was a democratic-minded Turk who wants a change, complete change in our government, I would love to have no help but the Armenian diaspora on my side.
But the third and fourth generation of Armenians in diaspora, are they care about Turkey?
To a level, yes, they do. To a level.
If you think that, in order to improve the relations between Armenians and Turks, then there is the Armenia and Turkey relationship, which is a different level still. And whether you see it or not, big elephant in the room is the genocide and the recognition and how to deal with it and what responsibility the Turkish government has. And so for that, there's a lot of effort to make sure to get the government to recognize what happened as genocide from the Armenian side. And in order to assess the progress there, you have to know what the situation is in Turkey. When Erdogan first came in and Hrant was speaking more openly about this, and there were workshops about the Armenian genocide, the entire diaspora stood up and took notice. And to see that 20, 30 years later, there is this opening and the conversation taking place in Turkey was very hopeful for the diaspora. And just as, good that was to sort of see things go back after that. And obviously, Hrant's assassination was a big, shock to the system to say, oh, we thought it was more open and you could speak about it and you could have dialogue, but when you do, then you're gunned down.
Personally, I look at Germany. It's a good example for our situation, what we're discussing. What they did, how they solved their historical problems with the genocide they had. Any Jew around the world goes to Germany, they have a job, they have an apartment, they have security right away. they haven't lost their dignity. Armenians, minorities in Turkey, they don't live with dignity. They're not proud as a human being.
But it's also changing. Maybe small pace, but it's changing.
I hope so.
There is again a power imbalance there. Talking people to people, from Armenians to Turks, I'm not convinced that on a big global scale that there is much to be done or the ideas or the thinking to be shifted at that level. Hrant did that, and others do, and that still happens. But to me, the impact is small, as opposed to, ultimately, if and when the government of Turkey says, yes, these things happen, and it starts from the top, that the thawing could be a lot faster than on a one-to-one.
But on the other hand, though, what you're wishing, you're right. But the problem with government admitting the wrongs of the history is counterproductive. Every government thinks of their advantages and disadvantages, minuses and pluses. It is big blow to the establishment of Turkish Republic, number one, admitting what happened prior to 1923. Number two is it's like falsifying some of your heroes. Some of those heroes, the people that establish, along with Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, some of them İttihat leaders, they were in the Armenian massacres.
Sure.
So you're taking the historical heroes and then making them villains or murderers when you open up that Pandora's box.
But one thing I'm struggling with myself, so I'm a parent to two daughters, 6 and 10-year-olds. And the next thing I think in my parenthood is to talk with them about the Armenian Genocide, because so far they seem to enjoy being an American. They were born here, but also being a Turk, having a family and visiting them in Turkey and everywhere. But I really need to find a way to communicate to them that that's something that happened in the history that they have to face, the reality that being a Turk and that's a part of the Turkish history. And coming to terms with it is very important. That's my next task, I guess, to deal with that thing as a way of communicating to them and helping them to deal with it. It's not an easy thing.